Bible contradictions are a favorite tool of skeptics and critics. One of the more famous examples of a supposed Bible contradiction involves the question, was Moses a good speaker? According to Stephen in the book of Acts, he was. Acts 7:22 tells us that Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. The book of Exodus seems to say something different, though. In Exodus 4:10, Moses says, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue." So which is it? Was Moses an eloquent speaker, or was he a poor public speaker, possibly with some kind of speech impediment? Well, the critic's going to say that obviously these two texts cannot be reconciled, so this is a perfect case where the Bible contradicts itself. Well, a knowledgeable reader is going to understand that there is no contradiction here because the problem lies not in the biblical text, but in misunderstanding it. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen is recounting the history of Israel and describes Moses as a talented leader. That much is clear. But in the book of Exodus, we have a special consideration that biblical critics are missing completely. Moses does refer to himself as being limited in his speaking ability. English translations typically render the passage as slow of speech and tongue. The Hebrew text literally says that he has a heavy mouth and a heavy tongue. We also have to consider that even though Moses claims to be a poor speaker, and God even promises to make Aaron the spokesman for the two of them, it's actually Moses who does all the talking. He really isn't a bad public speaker after all. So, how do we explain Moses' objection here? Scholars have investigated what it might mean in light of ancient Near Eastern culture. In the ancient world, similar language to what Moses uses to describe himself is also found in Sumerian and Akkadian texts from Mesopotamia. But the precise meaning isn't easy to determine. It could refer to a speech impediment, to simple stammering, or the inability to speak a language fluently. However, the real problem isn't so much Moses' mouth as it is his attitude. Moses' refusal is what is called a ritual protest. This is an objection where the speaker uses self-deprecating language. And one scholar has referred to this practice as an example of exaggerated humility. We can find examples of this throughout the Hebrew Bible. In Genesis 18:27, when speaking to God, Abraham refers to himself as, "I who am but dust and ashes." In 1 Samuel 9:21, when Saul is selected as king of Israel, he says, "Am I not a Benjamite from the least of the tribes of Israel? And is not my clan the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin?" In 1 Samuel 24:14, David calls himself a dead dog and a flea. In 2 Samuel 9:8, when questioning David's unexpected kindness, Jonathan's son Mephibosheth refers to himself as a dead dog. In 1 Kings 3:7, when talking to God about the honor of being made king, Solomon says, "I am but a little child," even though we know he was a grown man at the time. In Jeremiah 1:6, when he's commissioned as a prophet, Jeremiah objects by saying, "Behold, I do not know how to speak, for I am only a youth." Now, this language sounds remarkably similar to what Moses is using of himself in the book of Exodus. And we do know that speaking ability was highly valued in Egypt, especially among magicians. Isis, the goddess of magic and the wife of Osiris, is quoted in the Metternich Stele as saying, "I am Isis the goddess, the possessor of magic, who performs magic, splendid of speech." Elsewhere, the god Hagar is described as excellent of words. Egyptian magicians were said to have been eloquent speakers as well, and these are the very people with whom Moses is going to contend when carrying out his mission. So let's paint a picture here with the biblical text, what we know from ancient Egypt, and some common sense. The text says that Moses had been away from Egypt for a while. He may have been afraid to go back to the royal court. When he left Egypt, Moses was a man wanted for murder. We also have to recognize that he hadn't needed to speak the Egyptian language in a very long time. No doubt he had forgotten some of it due to non-use and therefore had lost his fluency. Well, it was important to be a good speaker when you went to visit a foreign head of state, and it would have been expected from someone in Moses' position. He may have thought that he might be ridiculed by members of the court, or do an inferior job of representing God before the king in a very high-pressure situation. It seems that Moses simply felt inadequate for the task. He's called to return to a country where he was guilty of murder, to lead a people among whom he has not lived, and to address important government officials in a language that he hasn't spoken for decades. That is a lot to ask of anyone, and it explains why Moses would have objected to his calling, and why he specifically chose to single out his speaking ability when downplaying his qualifications. So, we have to see this objection for what it is: a ritual protest born out of an exaggerated humility that was fairly common in the ancient Near East, that was probably further motivated by personal interests. The book of Acts describes Moses as he was, a talented, educated leader. In Exodus, Moses is describing himself as inadequate in the attempt to avoid going on this mission. So it's pretty easy to see that there's no contradiction between these two descriptions. Taking context into account is extremely important, and unfortunately, it's something that the Bible's critics regularly fail to do.